Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but I remember the first time it happened like it was yesterday. I was 9 years old, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, my legs aching the way they always did. The pain had been a constant in my life, something the doctors couldn't quite explain. Some nights were worse than others, but that night, something changed. I remember feeling strange, not sleepy, not awake, just stuck, like my body was locked in place. My fingers twitched slightly, my breath felt shallow, and no matter how much I willed it, I couldn't move. I tried to call out for my mom, but my throat refused to make a sound. That was when I saw it. A blue light. It seeped through the bedroom window. At first just a glow, but then it grew, flooding the room with an otherworldly hue. I wanted to close my eyes, to squeeze them shut and pretend it wasn't happening, but I couldn't even do that. My heart hammered, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. Then I felt it, a shift in the air, like the atmosphere itself had been sucked away. My blanket slipped from my body, sliding off the bed in slow motion, but there was no wind, no force I could see, just an invisible hand peeling it away. Then I was rising, my body lifted from the mattress, weightless, effortless. My limbs dangled, my head lolled back, but I wasn't in control. The window should have stopped me. Glass, the locked frame, none of it mattered. I passed right through as if it wasn't even there. The blue light wrapping around me, carrying me higher, higher. The cold night air should have shocked me awake, but I was trapped inside myself, a passenger in my own body. I saw my house shrink below me, the rooftops, the streets, the sleeping world. Then, nothing. Blackness swallowed everything. The next thing I remember, I was on a table, cold metal beneath my skin. Around me, others, children, their eyes wide, filled with the same silent terror I felt. We couldn't move, couldn't scream. A sound, no, a voice, but not spoken aloud. It was inside my head, inside all of us. We are here to help. The words were calm, soothing, but there was something unsettling about them, something too precise, too practiced. Then I saw it. The figure, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. A robe draped over its body, but I could see beneath it the hard, segmented shell, the multi-jointed arms. Its face was something out of a nightmare, like a praying mantis stretched to human proportions. Its black eyes too large, too empty. It moved without sound, gliding toward me, and I felt a pressure in my skull as it spoke again. No, not spoke, communicated. You are broken. We will fix you. I wanted to struggle, to thrash against whatever invisible force held me down, but my body was still frozen. I could only watch as one of its thin, clawed fingers extended toward my leg. Something sharp, a needle-like instrument pressed into my skin. No pain, just the sensation of something cold spreading through me. Another needle, another. 3 in one leg, 3 in the other. I wanted to scream, I couldn't. It continued speaking in my mind, explaining the procedure, but the words blurred, slipping away. My vision darkened. When I woke up, I was in my bed. My blanket was still on the floor, exactly where it had fallen before I was taken. My body ached, but not in the same way. I sat up slowly, hesitantly, and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The moment my feet touched the floor, I knew something was different. The weakness that had plagued me for years, the pain, the struggle to walk, it was gone. I took a cautious step, then another. No pain, no effort. It was like I had been given a new body, one that worked the way it was always meant to. Then I saw them, the marks. 3 small punctures on each leg, exactly where the needles had gone in. Proof. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, a hallucination, but the evidence was right there on my skin. And my legs, they worked. From that night on, I never had trouble walking again, but that wasn't the last time I saw them. Years passed. I tried to forget, to push it down, to convince myself I had imagined it, but then in 2001, it happened again. Not to me, to someone else. I was older by then, in my early 20s, visiting a small town, staying with an elderly couple who had taken me in for the summer. They had a granddaughter, a little girl no older than 8, full of life, always running, always laughing. Until the night she disappeared. I woke up to the same blue light. It flooded the room, washing everything in its unnatural glow. My stomach dropped. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew what was happening. I ran to the window just in time to see her being lifted into the air, her small body limp, her golden hair fanned out around her. The old couple's screams filled the night as they burst into the yard, but there was nothing they could do. She was already too high, already gone. The light vanished. The night returned to silence. The authorities searched. They found nothing. No footprints, no forced entry, no clues. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. But I knew she was somewhere out there, on a cold metal table, staring into the black, soulless eyes of something that didn't belong on this earth. And I knew that one day they might come back for me. Read your two. I've never told anyone this before, not really. My sister and I used to joke about it, laugh it off, but deep down, I know it's real. We both do. We just don't talk about it. Not in any serious way. Not unless we want to feel like we're unraveling. But I remember things, and so does she. It started when I was 6, maybe younger. I used to tell my dad how I couldn't wait to go back to bed and see the aliens again. I said it so casually, like a kid talking about Santa Claus. I don't know why I wasn't scared. I should have been. But back then it felt normal, expected. Like part of my life, the way school was, or brushing my teeth. I didn't think too hard about it, didn't question it. I just wanted them to come back. And that's the part that scares me now. That I wanted it. That some part of me was drawn to them. But I never remembered what happened, not exactly. It wasn't like the stories you hear about flashing lights or missing time or waking up in a field somewhere. I don't think it was physical, not in the way you'd expect. It was something else, something deeper. It felt like they entered my mind, like they were always just there, waiting, watching. I'd go to sleep and wake up feeling strange, like I'd lived another life while I was dreaming. Sometimes I'd wake up exhausted, my limbs heavy, my body sore in ways I couldn't explain. Other times, I'd wake up feeling hollow, like something had been scooped out of me. I didn't have the words for it then. I barely have them now. My sister had it worse. She'd scream in the middle of the night, these raw animal sounds that would send my parents rushing into her room. Night terrors, they said, just bad dreams. But I knew better. Even as a kid, I knew, because I recognized the fear in her voice. It was the same fear I felt, the same fear that sat in my chest every night as I closed my eyes. She said it was always the same man. A tall figure, shadowed, standing at the foot of her bed, whispering things she couldn't understand. She never saw his face. Or maybe she did and just couldn't make herself remember. It ruined my parents. They were exhausted all the time, frustrated, drained. They tried everything. Therapy, sleeping pills, even burning sage once because a neighbor told them it might help. It didn't. I think deep down they knew something was wrong. Something bigger than nightmares. But what do you do with that? How do you admit to yourself that your children might be slipping into something you can't protect them from? We never really put it together, not until we were adults. A month ago, we were talking, just casually, catching up. When I said it, yo, pretty sure we were abducted. I meant it as a joke. But she didn't laugh. She just went quiet for a long time and then said, yeah, I think so too. And just like that, it all unraveled. We started talking, comparing memories, filling in the gaps of things we'd both been too scared to say out loud. The dreams, the voices, the strange sensations. The ghost boy. God, the ghost boy. He was mine, the one I saw every night at my grandmother's house. He was always waiting for me, standing at the edge of my bed, smiling. He wasn't scary, not then. He was my friend, my boyfriend even. That's what he told me, and I believed him. He'd whisper things to me, things I didn't understand. He'd tell me about Japanese and German people coming over on boats, about experiments in space. I never questioned it. It was just part of our world, our secret, and I loved him for it. I was a kid. I didn't know better. But looking back, I think that's where it all started, where they started. He wasn't a ghost. He was something else, something that wormed its way into my head, into my life, shaping me in ways I still don't fully understand. I dreamed about him for a decade, and my sister, she was having the same dreams. She never saw my ghost boy, but she saw someone else, something worse, and we both suffered for it. We both ended up with health problems, unexplained pains, issues no doctor could ever fully figure out. I have problems with my ovaries, my reproductive system, so messed up that no one can tell me why. My sister, she jokes that she's electric, that things break around her or come back to life when she touches them. But it's not a joke, it's real. We dream the same dreams. We wake up with nosebleeds. We hear ringing in our ears when no one else does. We call them stigmata seizures. Laugh about it like it's funny, but it's not really. Because sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I still feel them, watching, waiting. And I know they're not done with us. Not yet. Redditor 3. I'm not sure if I believe I was abducted, but I don't know how to explain what actually happened. I was out at night in the outer city, having a few drinks at a bar, watching my friend's band play. It was their first live show, and I went alone to give a bit of support. The place was packed, the kind of dimly lit dive where the floors are sticky, and the sound system is just good enough to make out the lyrics, but not good enough to stop your ears from ringing afterward. I had a couple of beers, nothing heavy, just enough to keep a buzz going while I watched the set. It wasn't a wild night, nothing crazy happened, just a bunch of people drinking, nodding their heads to the music, and me hanging back, enjoying the atmosphere. After the set and a while of post-show drinking, I decided to head out and catch a train home. The station was only about a 5-minute walk away. Easy enough. I remember stepping out of the pub, holding my jacket, and taking in the night. The street was reasonably busy, not packed, but there were people around. It was a nice night, a little cool, but nothing uncomfortable. I stopped for a second to pull my jacket on, zipped it up, and looked up. And then everything changed. Instantly. No warning, no slow fade, just a hard cut, like my entire life had been spliced and rearranged without my permission. 1 second, I was on the street outside the bar, surrounded by the sound of traffic, voices, the occasional laughter from drunken groups walking past. The next second, I was standing in the middle of an open, grassy park, in the absolute pouring rain. No sound of the city. No buildings. Just black sky, trees in the distance, and rain hammering down so hard I could barely see. My first thought was that I was dreaming. Had to be. But the cold of the rain was real. The smell of wet grass and mud was real. The weight of my drenched clothes, the way my breath came out in sharp little gasps. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't a dream, but I couldn't process it. My brain refused to make sense of it. I just stood there, blinking, waiting for my mind to catch up with my body. I had no idea where I was, no clue how I'd gotten there. My heart started pounding, this slow, creeping panic crawling up my spine. I reached for my phone. Dead. Completely drained, like the battery had been sucked dry. That was when the real fear kicked in. I had no way to check the time, no way to call anyone, no way to get my bearings. I looked around, trying to see through the sheets of rain. No signs, no roads, just empty, open land stretching in every direction. I forced myself to move, my feet squelching in the wet grass as I started walking. I had no idea where I was going, just that I needed to get out of there, find a road, find someone, something. The cold was starting to seep in, my hands shaking, my teeth chattering. I kept moving. I don't know how long I walked. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Time didn't feel right, nothing did. Eventually, I saw it, a road, slick with rain, stretching off into the darkness. Relief hit me so hard, I almost dropped to my knees. I hurried toward it, scanning both directions, hoping for headlights, for some sign of life. And then, like some kind of miracle, I saw it. A taxi, an old beaten-up cab rolling down the road, its headlights cutting through the storm. I waved frantically, stepping out onto the asphalt, not even caring if I looked insane. The taxi slowed, then stopped. The driver leaned over, rolling down the window. "You all right, mate?" His voice was thick with an accent I couldn't place. I must have looked half drowned, my hair plastered to my forehead, my jacket soaked through. I nodded, barely able to get the words out. "I need to get home." He didn't ask questions, just unlocked the door and let me in. The heater was blasting, filling the car with that dry, artificial warmth, and I sank into the seat, my body shivering violently. "Where you headed?" he asked, pulling back onto the road. I gave him my address. He nodded, like nothing about this was strange, like I wasn't some guy who had just appeared in the middle of nowhere, drenched and shaking. I wanted to ask him where we were, what town, what part of the city, anything, but I didn't. Something in my gut told me not to. I just sat there, staring out the window, watching the rain streak against the glass, trying to piece together what had happened. I still had all my possessions, my wallet, my keys, my phone, dead, but still in my pocket. No money missing, no signs that I'd been mugged or drugged or anything like that. And I felt fine. No headache, no dizziness, just cold, just confused. I got home eventually, paid the driver, went inside, stood in the shower for what felt like hours, trying to shake the feeling that I'd stepped out of my own life and into something else. 5 years later, I still don't know what happened. I've gone over it 1,000 times, tried to logic my way through it. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe I was drunker than I thought, even though I only had a few drinks. Maybe I was drugged somehow, even though nothing was missing and I never felt sick. But none of it explains the distance. I checked the next day. That park, it was 25 miles, 40 kilometers from the bar. No trains, no buses, no way I could have gotten there in the time it took for me to zip up my jacket. 1 second, I was in the city. The next, I was in the middle of nowhere, in the rain, with no memory of how I got there. And the part that scares me the most, the part I try not to think about, I still hear it sometimes. A sound, a low, droning hum, right at the edge of my hearing, just beneath the noise of everyday life, like a frequency that wasn't meant for me, slipping through the cracks. And when I hear it, I get this feeling, this certainty that it's not over, that whatever happened that night, whatever took me, it's still out there, watching, waiting. Redditor 4. I've never told anyone this before, not really. I mean, I've told people what happened, described the events, but I've never actually let myself think too hard about what it all meant, because the second I do, the second I start trying to put the pieces together, something deep in my gut twists into a knot, warning me that I don't actually want the answer. That knowing is worse than wondering. But I keep thinking about it anyway. It was just supposed to be a drive, a simple, normal drive down to Ensenada from Tijuana. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time we reached the scenic overlook rest stop. The sky a deepening navy, the ocean stretching out into endless black. It was around 8 p.m. when we pulled in. Quiet still, just the distant hum of waves breaking against the cliffs below. I remember stepping into the bathroom first, the cold tile, the flickering fluorescent light overhead. When I came back out, my girlfriend and her friend were already at the overlook, standing side by side, staring out at something in the water. I walked over, drawn by the stillness in their posture, the way neither of them spoke. It wasn't until I reached them that I saw what they saw. There was an object out there, hovering just above the surface of the water. Not a boat. Not anything I could name. A bright orange light pulsed from it, soft but steady, and the glow reflected against the water just enough to reveal its outline, something solid, something real. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't moving like anything I'd ever seen. It just existed there, suspended between sea and sky. I pulled out my phone, instinct taking over. My fingers were cold as I hit record, my breath slow and measured as I watched it through the screen. For a minute, maybe two, the object remained in place, almost as if it was waiting. Then, with an unnatural grace, it moved. It submerged. Not like a boat sinking, not like a splash, but like something phasing seamlessly beneath the waves. Then it re-emerged, rising from the water like it had never left. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. My chest felt tight. "Looks cool," I said, forcing a laugh that didn't feel real. "But we're gonna be late." The words tasted wrong the second they left my lips. We weren't late for anything. There was no schedule, no reason to leave except for the cold, gnawing sense that we shouldn't be here, that we weren't supposed to see this. We left. No one argued. No one said a word. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I sat down, phone in hand, ready to go over what I had recorded the night before to prove to myself that it was real, that I hadn't imagined it. But when I hit play, my stomach twisted. The video was wrong. It wasn't what I had seen. The screen was pitch black, the only thing visible a single orange sphere, unmoving, floating in the void. No water, no object, just that pulsing light, watching me. I turned off the video. I didn't talk about it again. 6 or 7 months passed. I let myself forget, let the memory sink beneath the surface of my mind like that thing in the water. And then it happened again. We were on the beach in Rosarito, just relaxing, smoking hookah, listening to the waves roll in. It was a normal night, a comfortable night, and then my girlfriend pointed. "White orbs," she said, her voice light, like it was nothing. I dismissed it immediately. "Fishing boats," I told her. "Probably just lights from fishing boats. The kind of thing you don't really notice until you do. The kind of thing that looks weird if you let your eyes play tricks on you." She started to believe me. I could see it in her face, in the way her shoulders eased just a little. And then the lights moved. What had been 3 lights became 7. I kept my voice calm, steady. "The ship turned," I reasoned. "We're just seeing all the lights now. From this angle, they lined up before." She started to nod, started to buy into it. Then, one by one, the lights shot off into the sky, straight up, gone. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. She turned to me, her voice thin, barely above a whisper. "Boats don't fly." I had no answer. For the next 30 minutes, we sat there, watching. The lights reappeared, shifting, repositioning, moving like nothing I had ever seen before. They weren't airplanes. They weren't helicopters. They weren't drones. They would blink out, vanish completely, only to return in a different part of the sky moments later. I watched, unable to look away, my mind grasping for explanations that didn't exist. If it was an illusion, I want to know how. If it was something natural, something explainable, I need to understand. But I don't think I ever will. And the worst part? Some nights, when I close my eyes, I see that orange light, pulsing, waiting. And deep down, I know, I'll see it again. Redditor 5. I fell asleep on my sofa one night after work a few years ago. Nothing unusual, just exhaustion dragging me down. The soft hum of the television in the background, my body sinking into the cushions like it had melted into them. At some point, I stirred, not fully awake but not fully asleep either, that strange in-between place where reality feels too thick, too heavy. My eyes cracked open, and the first thing I did was glance at the clock on my cable box. 3:16 a.m. That was good. That meant I was awake. I often use clocks in dreams to trigger lucidity when I can remember to. Dreams always get time wrong, numbers shifting, melting, creating things that don't make sense. 668, 25, 89, things that don't belong. But the clock was normal, 3:16. Solid, real. I let out a slow breath, tried to sit up, to move, to make my way to bed, and that's when I knew something was wrong. The living room was pitch black except for the faint glow of the clock, casting a dim light over the coffee table, the edges of the furniture. But the darkness felt too thick, pressing against me, heavy in a way it shouldn't have been. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew someone was there. I felt them, standing over me, right above me, close. Close enough that I should have been able to hear their breathing, but there was nothing, just silence. My chest tightened. I tried to move again, and that's when I realized I couldn't. I was pinned, held down by something I couldn't see, something I couldn't fight. A weight pressed against my chest, not like hands, not like a body, but like presence. Like something was sinking into me, weaving itself through my skin, threading itself through my bones. Panic hit me like a tidal wave. I thrashed, or at least I tried to. My arms, my legs, my body, they wouldn't listen. I was drowning in my own skin, every inch of me screaming for movement, for escape, but there was nothing I could do. The pressure grew heavier, suffocating, pressing down on my ribs, my throat. My breath came in shallow gasps, barely there. The weight in my chest turned to something sharp, something suffocating. Tears burned in my eyes, my mind repeating a single frantic thought. This is not a dream. This is not a dream. This is not a dream. I wanted to scream. I think I did scream. My ears rang with the sound of it. Raw, desperate, but it was swallowed by the dark, lost in the space around me. Then, nothing. No transition. No slow fade. Just a hard cut, like a switch being flipped. I was awake. It was morning. 6 a.m. The light from the window was bleeding through the curtains, soft and gold, the TV still playing low in the background. I was on the sofa, exactly where I had been. My body felt sore, like I had been holding tension for hours. My breath was still shaky, my hands clammy with sweat. But I was awake, really awake. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, my mind replaying what had happened, picking it apart, trying to force it into something that made sense. But the worst part, the thing I keep coming back to over and over, if it had been a dream, if it had been just sleep paralysis, I should have realized the second I looked at the clock. I should have known, but I didn't. And that means, in those moments, in that dark, crushing silence, something else was there, something that was watching, something that was waiting. I haven't slept on that sofa since, and I don't think I ever will. Redditor 6. I had to sleep in my parents' bedroom for a few days because their room was the only one with heat. I didn't like it. Sleeping on the floor, hearing my dad snoring, feeling out of place in a room that wasn't mine. But it was better than freezing. On one particular night, I remember my dad's alarm going off at 4:30 a.m. The sharp beeping shattered the quiet, dragging me halfway out of sleep. I stayed curled up in my blanket as I heard him shuffle around, get dressed, mumble something to my mom, and then leave for work. After a while, I got up, still groggy, and sat in the kitchen, watching the clock tick. I wasn't fully awake, but I wasn't really tired either. I just didn't want to be in that room anymore. But eventually, exhaustion won. I decided to go back to my own room, tired of sleeping on the floor. The second I walked in, I felt relief. My bed, my space, even in the dark, everything felt familiar. Safe. I crawled under the covers and turned to my side, staring at my dresser, at the mirror on top of it, the way the faint glow of the streetlight outside barely illuminated its surface. That's when I saw it, a shadow, tall, motionless, standing at the edge of my bed. My mind tried to make sense of it. A trick of the light? Something in my room casting a strange reflection? My eyes darted around, searching for an explanation, but my heart was already sinking, because as I watched, it moved. Slowly, deliberately. I couldn't look away. I was too afraid to turn, too afraid to see it with my own eyes instead of through the mirror. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to believe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, I felt it. The bed dipped. The sound of weight shifting on the mattress, the faint creak of the springs under pressure. Someone was climbing in with me. Every part of my body screamed to move, to run, to do something. But I was frozen, paralyzed by a dread so deep, so consuming, I could barely breathe. I could feel it beside me, the warmth of another presence where there should have been none. I squeezed my eyes shut. My body was rigid, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes and it was morning. Sunlight poured through my window, warm and soft, as if nothing had happened. I bolted upright, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I scanned the room, every inch of it, searching for something, anything, that could explain what I had felt. But there was nothing. Just my dresser, my mirror, my empty bed. I tried telling my mom what happened, but the second I opened my mouth, I started crying. Not because I was scared, but because I felt wrong. Invaded. Like something had touched me, been inside my space, my body, my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling. I still can't. I've joked with my SO before, made light of it, said maybe I was abducted by aliens, maybe it was a demon crawling into bed with me. But the truth is, I don't know. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if there's a logical explanation. I just know that I have never felt so terrified, so empty, so completely violated as I did in that moment. And I never will again. I won't let myself. Redditor 7. My dad doesn't like talking about it. His hands get a little shaky and his voice tightens, like even remembering it puts him back there. I've asked him about it a few times, but he never gives me much, just short, clipped answers, like he's afraid saying too much might make it real again. But this is what I know. He was 15, just a kid, and he and his friend were doing the classic childhood tradition of camping in the backyard. Nothing unusual, just two boys in a tent, probably telling dumb jokes, trying to scare each other, enjoying the small thrill of being outside without really being outside. They went to bed around midnight. Then, at some point, they woke up. But they weren't in the tent anymore. They weren't in the backyard. They were in an empty grass field, 2.5 miles away from his house. Neither of them remembered leaving. Neither of them knew how they had gotten there. My dad describes it as waking up into wrongness. A thick mental fog, confusion so heavy that for a long moment they just stood there, staring at each other, their brains refusing to connect the dots. Then, panic. His first instinct was to check his watch. 4 a.m. 4 hours gone. A full block of time missing, wiped clean from his mind like it had never happened. They weren't drunk. They weren't high. They had done nothing but go to sleep in his backyard. And somehow, they had ended up here, miles away, standing in wet grass, under a dark, empty sky, with nothing around them but open land. He doesn't remember how they got back. He says they just started walking, trying to reorient themselves, trying to get their bearings. He remembers the cold, the feeling of damp air on his skin. He remembers his friend's voice shaking when he spoke, something hollow and scared in the way he kept repeating, "What the hell just happened? What the hell just happened?" He remembers reaching his house and seeing the tent still there, untouched, the flaps still zipped, like nothing had ever been inside it. But he doesn't remember those 4 hours, not 1 second of them, and he never will. He's never told me outright that he thinks it was them, never called it an abduction, but he never let me camp in our backyard growing up, and that tells me everything I need to know. Redditor 8. Late to the party as usual, but I've seen a UFO. I was with my then boyfriend. We were both 20. It was November 11, 2011 in rural Louisiana at his parents' house. They had a big field, just open land stretching to the tree line, and we used to go out there and mess around, talk about dumb things, make fun of the kind of people who swore they'd seen UFOs. We used to point at the moon and, in exaggerated accents, say things like, "Ah, yeah, look at that dare, that's the mothership right there," and giggle like idiots, convinced we were smarter than that. We were doing exactly that when something came out from the right of our peripheral, a light. A massive, super bright light. It was huge, bigger than anything I'd ever seen in the sky, way larger than a plane. We guessed it had to be at least the size of a couple of 18-wheelers. It wasn't a twinkle, not some distant star or a flash from a plane. It was solid, blinding, so bright we couldn't make out the shape at all. At first we thought maybe it was a reflection, some kind of weird illusion from our eyes adjusting to the night. But the longer we stood there, the more we knew it wasn't. This thing was there, real and massive, moving in a way that felt deliberate. We fell completely silent. The light moved, steady, purposeful, gliding to a stop in front of us, hovering about 200 yards away, right at the edge of the field where the trees started. I remember the way it lit up the treetops, the glow spreading down the trunks like someone was holding a spotlight above them. The light was unnatural, too bright, too contained, not spreading like headlights or a flashlight would. It was like it didn't belong in this world, like it was something pulled from a different place entirely. We should have stayed where we were. We should have just watched. But instead, without really thinking, we started jogging toward it. I don't even know why. Curiosity? Adrenaline? Some weird pull we couldn't explain? But as soon as we got closer, the light suddenly moved, jerking side to side in a way I had never seen anything move before. It wasn't normal. It wasn't like a helicopter or a drone or anything explainable. It was smooth but erratic at the same time, almost like it was testing the space around it. We froze, just stood there, watching, trying to make sense of it. Then it started moving downward, still doing that strange, side-to-side motion. Its light poured over the trees, turning them into silhouettes, making everything below glow like daylight. It made no sound, no hum of an engine, no rush of air. And then, just like that, it was gone. It disappeared behind the trees without a sound. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt longer, stretched out, burned into my brain in perfect clarity. We just stood there, staring at where it had been, not knowing what to say. Then the adrenaline hit. I started jumping up and down, freaking out, talking way too fast. That was real, right? We both saw that. This is real. What happened? Seriously, what happened? My boyfriend's face was pale, his mouth slightly open like he was still trying to catch up to what his brain had just witnessed. We went over it again and again, replaying every moment, trying to make sense of it. But nothing added up. Nothing made sense. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a drone, it wasn't a flare or a reflection. It was something else. I tried calling my best friend Kelly because she's always believed in aliens, always been obsessed with this kind of thing, but she didn't answer. So I left a voicemail yelling into the phone, "Kelly, they're real. Kelly, they're fucking real." We listened to it later and laughed, but at the time, I wasn't joking. The next day, I needed answers. I called all the airports in the area, spoke to people in the towers, asked if they had anything flying in that part of the sky at that time. Nothing. No reports, no flights logged. I called the police, news agencies, left my information in case anyone else saw something similar in the near future. But I didn't file a report. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me didn't want to make it official, didn't want to put it on paper and force myself to acknowledge what I'd seen. We were so utterly perplexed by the whole thing that we didn't even think to get a video, and maybe that's the worst part. We saw something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, and all we have to prove it is our memories. But it doesn't end there. A few months later, I was back at his parents' house, standing in that same field, staring at that same tree line. I didn't expect to see anything. I didn't even know why I was looking. But I swear, for a split second, I saw something flicker. A tiny pulse of orange, like something had briefly sparked to life deep in the woods. It was gone as soon as it appeared, but it left me with this sinking feeling, like the universe had just brushed against me again, whispering a reminder. And that wasn't the last time. Years later, long after we had broken up, I was driving home late at night, just outside of town, on an empty road with no streetlights. It was the kind of night where everything felt unnaturally still, the air thick with silence. I hadn't thought about that night in years, at least not consciously. But as I rounded a bend, my headlights catching nothing but empty road ahead, something flashed in my rearview mirror, a light. Bright, too bright. I slammed on the brakes, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering in my chest. When I looked back, there was nothing there. The road behind me was pitch black, empty. No headlights, no streetlights, just the night swallowing everything whole. But for those few seconds, I felt it again. That presence, that watching. I don't know what we saw that night in 2011. I don't know if it was aliens or something else entirely. Something we don't have a name for yet. But I know it was real. I know what I saw. And I know, somehow, that it saw me too. And maybe, just maybe, it's still watching. Redditor 9. I've had many encounters, though it may all just be in my mind. They started when I was a young boy living on a lake in northern Michigan. I remember so clearly looking over the lake at night and seeing lights zipping around in the distance, faster than any airplane could fly. Seldom did flights pass by us anyway. We were in the middle of nowhere. It always made me uneasy just looking at them, those silent darting lights that moved like nothing I had ever seen before. But I never told anyone. I would just stare and wonder, trying to convince myself they were far away, maybe just tricks of the eye, maybe nothing at all. And then one winter night, it happened. I went to bed, like any other night, blankets pulled up to my chin, the house silent except for the occasional groan of the walls adjusting to the cold. And then, suddenly, I was somewhere else. An unlit coat room, my hands fumbling with thick winter layers, pulling them over my thin pajamas. I wasn't thinking, I wasn't questioning, I was just doing, like my body had made a decision my mind wasn't aware of. The next thing I knew, I was walking, down the 100-yard hill to the shoreline, my steps crunching over fresh snow, lit only by pale blue moonlight. The cold pierced through my pajama bottoms, biting at my skin, but I didn't turn back. I didn't stop. I stood at the base of our dock, my breath curling into the air, everything still and quiet like it gets when the world is buried under deep snow. That eerie silence, the way sound gets swallowed whole, like the whole world is holding its breath. I don't know how long I stood there before I looked up, and that's when I saw it. A black shape moving against the clouds, cutting across the sky with unnatural precision. It didn't glide, it didn't wobble like a plane, it hovered straight toward the center of the lake, where it stopped, perfectly still. I could tell it had seen me. or sensed me, or something. I just knew it was aware of me, the way you can feel someone staring at you in a dark room. Panic seized my chest, my legs frozen in place. I wanted to run. I should have run. But before I could move, before I could even blink, a violet pulse of light erupted from the object, illuminating everything. The entire landscape turned white-hot for a second. Trees, snow, ice. Every visible surface for what seemed like miles. I slammed my eyes shut, but the light still burned behind my eyelids. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I turned, scrambling up the icy hill, clawing at the frozen ground, my breath coming in frantic gasps. My legs felt weak, my balance off, like something was pulling at me. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, the sheer terror drowning out everything else. I made it about 60% of the way up before my foot caught in the deep snow. My body pitched forward, my face smacking hard into the path I had made earlier. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. And then, nothing. It was like falling through the snow, like the world had tilted, and I was dropping into something else, something I couldn't see. And then I was awake, in my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. My sheets were soaked in sweat, my body tense like I had been running for hours. The room was silent except for my ragged breathing, but I didn't feel alone. I felt watched. I didn't want to look outside. I didn't dare look outside. It was morning, a typical gray winter morning, but something felt off. Like the air itself had shifted, like my room wasn't really mine anymore, like I was still somewhere else and I had only been placed back in bed. I stayed under my blankets for what felt like forever before I finally worked up the courage to check the window. My stomach clenched. There were footprints in the snow, leading up and down the hill, perfectly clear. But that wasn't necessarily proof of anything, I told myself. We often used each other's footprints when walking down to ice fish or walking up from sledding. That was the logical explanation. That was what I had to believe. But deep down, I knew better. After that night, I never felt comfortable outside in winter again. Spring and summer were better, safer. Something about the leaves overhead, the way they obscured the sky, kept me from thinking too much about it. But in winter, with the sky wide open and exposed, I could feel it again. That sense of being alone, but not really alone. Like I was being watched, weighed, measured. Like something had marked me that night. And the strangest thing? It wasn't the last time. I've had other moments, other dreams that felt too real, other nights where I woke up in places I don't remember going. Sometimes I hear a low hum before I fall asleep. Not loud, not intrusive, just there, right at the edge of my hearing. And every time, I wonder, did it really happen, or is it happening again? I started noticing small things after that night. Electronics would glitch when I got close to them. The TV would change channels on its own, lights would flicker, but only when I walked into the room. My mom blamed faulty wiring, my dad laughed it off. But I could feel it, deep in my bones, that hum, that low vibration under my skin that never quite left. It wasn't just my imagination. One night, months after that winter encounter, I woke up standing in my doorway. My room was dark, but I could see something outside my window. Not a shape, not a figure, but a glow, a faint pulsing glow, almost like it was waiting for me. I blinked and it was gone. My knees buckled. I stumbled back into bed, my heart racing so fast I thought it might give out. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, my mom asked me why there were footprints leading from my bed to the window. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Years have passed and I've tried to forget. But sometimes when I walk outside alone at night, I still feel it. That weight in the air. That sensation that something is just beyond my line of sight, just waiting for me to notice it. I don't look up at the sky anymore. I don't want to see what's there. I don't want to know if they're still watching. But somehow, deep inside, I already know the answer. They never left. Redditor 10. I've chalked this up to a bad dream my entire life, but I guess it's worth mentioning. I had a friend a while back who said I exhibited symptoms he found corresponded with abductees. Odd fears of the dark, constantly looking out windows at night, never being comfortable with my back to an open door or an open space when I was alone. I always felt they were normal, irrational fears, the kind everyone has. Things left over from childhood that never quite go away. But then he asked if I could recall anything specific, anything that might have happened, and I could only think of one incident. One night, when I was 17, I lived with a guy in a motel at the time. It wasn't a great situation, but we made do. Our room was midway up, far from the ground, one of those cheap motels with long, dimly lit walkways stretching across the upper floors. The kind of place where people kept their heads down and minded their business. I remember going to bed that night like normal. Nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. Just another night in that cramped little room with the flickering bathroom light and the distant hum of late-night traffic outside. And then I had the dream. It wasn't like any dream I'd had before. It felt too real, too sharp, too perfectly detailed. The room was exactly the same as it was in real life. The old carpet, the smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains, the dim yellow glow from the street lamp filtering through the window. But there was something wrong, something just beneath the surface, something I couldn't put my finger on at first. And then I heard it, a steady electrical humming, faint but constant, vibrating through the air, pressing against my skull. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, only that it was outside. I tried to sit up, but I felt heavy, sluggish, like my body wasn't entirely my own. My head turned toward the window. The curtains started to move, but not like they should have. They weren't blowing inward like from an open window, and they weren't swaying from the AC. They were lifting, upward, from the bottom, like something was pulling them toward the ceiling. My breath caught in my throat. That shouldn't have been possible. Those windows couldn't open. They were sealed, thick glass, never meant to be touched, and the curtains themselves were heavy, stiff with years of dust and grime. There was no draft, no logical reason they should be moving like that, and then the light came, blinding, pouring in from beneath the curtains, white-hot and unnatural, cutting through the dimness of the room like a blade. It wasn't just light, it was presence. It was something coming, a deep, all-consuming fear spread through my chest, freezing me in place. I knew something was at the window. I couldn't see it, but I knew, and then the door started to open. The cheap motel lock didn't click. The handle didn't turn. It just opened, slowly, deliberately. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even close my eyes. The door crept open wider, inch by inch, revealing only darkness beyond. No hallway light, no sound, just emptiness. And then, nothing. The dream ended, just stopped. I woke up the next morning like everything was normal. No racing heart, no lingering panic, just nothing. Like my brain had smoothed over the entire thing, pressing it into the back of my mind, telling me not to think about it, not to question it. But the moment my friend asked me if I remembered anything, that night came rushing back like a flood. And the strangest part, I don't remember going to sleep that night. I remember lying down, I remember closing my eyes, but I don't remember the feeling of drifting off. I don't remember the slow fade into unconsciousness. It was like I blinked and suddenly I was there, in that dream, in that moment. And maybe it really was just a dream. Maybe that's all it ever was. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I know better. Because to this day, I still can't sleep near windows, and I never, ever sleep with the curtains open. But that wasn't the only thing that changed. Over the following weeks, strange things started happening. Small at first, easy to brush off. I'd wake up feeling exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all, even though I'd gone to bed early. My muscles would ache like I'd been running, like I had been physically doing something in my sleep. Sometimes I'd have bruises I didn't remember getting, small ones, on my arms, on my legs, sometimes in patterns, sometimes in places I could barely reach on my own. I ignored it. What else was I supposed to do? But then the sleepwalking started, or at least that's what I called it. I'd wake up standing in the bathroom or in the corner of the motel room, facing the wall, my heart racing, my body drenched in sweat. My boyfriend told me I had been getting up in the middle of the night, standing at the window, just staring outside. But I don't remember ever doing that, not once. He said he tried to talk to me, but I wouldn't respond. I would just stand there, still and silent, until eventually I turned and crawled back into bed. And then, one night, he woke up to find me at the door, my hand on the handle, about to open it. He grabbed my wrist, shaking me, his voice sharp and panicked. I woke up instantly, confused, disoriented, my heart slamming against my ribs. I had no memory of getting up, no memory of walking across the room. But the worst part? The door was already unlocked, and I never left it unlocked. From that night on, I was terrified to sleep. I started setting alarms, waking myself up every couple of hours just to make sure I was still in bed, just to make sure I wasn't moving, wasn't standing at the window, wasn't reaching for the door. But the exhaustion only got worse. I felt drained, hollowed out, like something was pulling pieces of me away, night after night. I started noticing small things during the day too. Static on the TV when no one had touched the remote. My phone glitching out, screens flashing in ways I had never seen before. Radios picking up strange, garbled frequencies, even when I wasn't anywhere near one. I told myself it was all in my head. I told myself I was being paranoid, until the night I saw the light again. I was in bed, curled up with my back against the wall, my hands clenched into fists beneath the covers. My boyfriend was snoring beside me. And then the hum started, low, distant, but I felt it in my bones. The air changed. My skin prickled with electricity. I wanted to move, I needed to move, but I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed. My eyes locked on the window, and there it was, the glow. The same impossible blinding light pouring through the edges of the curtains, reaching for me. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream. But then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. No fade out, no warning, just gone. The air settled, my body unlocked. I could move again. I sucked in a shaky breath, my hands shaking as I threw off the covers and stumbled toward the window. My fingers trembled as I pulled the curtain back just an inch. The parking lot was empty. Silent. No headlights, no street lamps flickering, nothing but darkness stretching into the night. But somehow, I knew something had been there, watching, waiting. I slammed the curtain shut and backed away, my heart still racing. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I didn't let myself. And I never stayed in that motel room again. I moved out the next week. I convinced myself it was over, that I was safe. But the truth is, I don't think I ever will be. Because sometimes, even now, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I feel it again. That presence. That silent, watching weight pressing down on my chest. And every single time, I keep my eyes shut tight. Because I know, if I look at the window, I'll see the light again. And this time, I don't think it will let me go. Redditor 11. This freaked me out for weeks. It was so real that I found myself Googling alien abductions for days after, trying to find anything that made sense of what had happened. I struggled to sleep and had to take NyQuil just to settle myself. I told myself over and over that it was just a dream, just a nightmare, just my imagination getting the better of me. But deep down, something felt wrong. Like it hadn't been a dream at all, like it had actually happened. The best I can remember, it was 5 years ago. I was sitting in something like a small movie theater, but the lights were on. The room was dim, but not dark. The kind of soft glow that makes everything feel sterile, artificial. There were a few other people there with me, maybe 10 of us, all seated in identical chairs, all facing the same direction. I wasn't scared at first. I didn't feel trapped, just there, sitting, waiting. Then I realized I was strapped in. A wide band stretched across my waist, another across my chest. It wasn't tight, but it wasn't loose either. It felt like I belonged in that chair, like it had been designed to fit me perfectly. I remember thinking that was odd, that I should be worried, but I wasn't. Not yet. Then the chair moved. Without warning, without any sound, it lifted up toward the ceiling, tilting so that I was suddenly facing the floor. My stomach lurched as I hung there, suspended, my body pressing into the straps. The waist strap pulled my top slightly, revealing my stomach, and I remember feeling self-conscious. Of all things, self-conscious. I moved my arm to adjust my shirt, to cover myself, but the chair jerked suddenly, tilting again, moving to the left at speed, dragging me into darkness. Everything went black. No sound, no sensation, just nothingness. And then I was awake. In my bed, lying on my stomach, which I never do, on top of the blankets, fully dressed, exactly as I had been in the dream. My breathing was shallow, my body still. I didn't move, I just lay there, my mind racing, trying to piece it together, trying to understand. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't dare make a sound. Something was off, something was wrong. I listened. And that's when I heard it. A scuffling noise. Somewhere in the room. Soft, shuffling, like movement just beyond my field of vision. I held my breath, my body tensed, my fingers gripping the sheets. My cat. I needed to feel for my cat. He always slept at the foot of the bed. I moved my foot, just an inch, reaching for him. Nothing. He didn't stir. He didn't react. He didn't wake up. That wasn't like him. That wasn't like him at all. And then I heard it, a voice, low, quiet, right next to me. She is waking up. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. My mind screamed at me to run, to move, to do something, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I lay there for 3 hours, too terrified to move, too terrified to open my eyes, too terrified to even breathe too deeply. My husband slept beside me. My cat lay still at my feet, both of them undisturbed, unaware, peaceful, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew better. When daylight finally came, I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my hands shaking. The fear did not leave. Even as I moved around the house, even as I tried to shake it off, it clung to me, thick and suffocating. I told my husband what had happened, every detail, every sensation. He laughed, said I had a nightmare, said I was overthinking it, said it was probably just sleep paralysis. But I knew. I had never had a dream like that before, and I've never had one since. But the fear still lingers, even now, because sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the shadows stretch just a little too long, I swear I can still hear that voice. She's waking up. And every time, I close my eyes, I hold my breath, and I pretend I didn't hear it, because I don't want to know what happens if I do. But that wasn't the end of it. I wish it was. I wish that was the last time something like that happened to me. But it wasn't. After that night, things started to change. Small things at first, things that were easy to brush off. I'd wake up feeling exhausted, even if I'd gone to bed early. My body would ache, muscles sore like I'd been running, moving, doing something in my sleep. Sometimes I'd find bruises, small, barely there at first, then more. Little marks along my arms, my thighs, sometimes in clusters, sometimes in straight lines, places I knew I hadn't bumped into anything. My husband didn't believe me. He said I was probably tossing and turning too hard in my sleep, maybe bumping into the headboard. But deep down, I knew better. Then one night I woke up somewhere else. I was standing in the middle of our living room, just standing there. My heart was pounding, my breath short, my body locked in place. I had no memory of getting up, no memory of walking there. I had gone to bed like normal, curled up under the blankets, and now I was here. My hands were cold, my feet were bare against the floor. And then I noticed the door, the front door. It was unlocked. And I never leave it unlocked. I never forget. My stomach twisted. My fingers trembled as I reached out, as I tested the handle. The door swung open without resistance, and outside, the porch light was off. The street was silent. But the sky, there was something wrong with the sky. It looked too deep, too black. Not like night, but like something was missing. Like the stars had been pulled away, leaving only empty space. I slammed the door shut. I locked it. I stood there for what felt like hours, my back pressed against the wood, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might give out. Eventually, I forced myself to go back to bed. I pulled the covers over my head. I squeezed my eyes shut. I told myself it was just sleepwalking, just stress. But I never went back to sleep. And the next morning, my husband asked why there were footprints leading from our bedroom door to the front door. Bare footprints. My footprints. But I had no answer, because I didn't remember walking there. I didn't remember anything at all. I wish I could say it stopped, that nothing else ever happened, that I stopped hearing the hum at night, that I stopped seeing the glow of light beneath the curtains, that I stopped waking up in strange places. But I can't, because it still happens. Not every night, not even every month, but sometimes, without warning, I wake up and I know something is wrong. I wake up and the house feels different. I wake up and my skin hurts like I've been touched, like something has held me down. And every time I do the same thing. I close my eyes, I hold my breath, and I pretend I didn't hear it, because I don't want to know what happens if I do. Redditor 12. I'll start with some background information, and I will say that I do not know with absolute certainty that I was abducted, but I have experienced things that I believe point in that direction. I do have a family member who is a former member of a certain intelligence agency in the United States whose name I will not disclose as I do not want to reveal too much in case someone I know finds this post. Anyway, I was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid back around 2002. Apparently, ADHD diagnoses were really popular in the US. Who would have known? And when I was 4 or so, I noticed I would sometimes wake up on the floor of my room or with my head resting near the foot of my bed. This is in addition to the perception of having fallen asleep for a second, only to wake up in the morning a second later. I know I've always had an intense interest in anything involving space. Really, planets, moons, nebulae, constellations, satellites, stars, you name it. Around the time I was in 4th grade, I watched some show, part of a miniseries on the Nature Channel, I believe, and it was about alien abductions and whatnot. I had a weird phase where I watched a bunch of stuff on Discovery, Times, Nat Geo, Science Channel, etc. Watching the aforementioned episode of that miniseries probably reinforced that fear. Anyway, I was terribly afraid of the image of a gray, and not a whole lot happened up until the time the family member I mentioned before moved next door. Apparently, shortly after they moved in, my family found me at the end of the road our house is located on, and I was nearly naked in just my boxers when it was 30 degrees Fahrenheit outside. They still bring it up. Problem is, I remember none of it, and I'm told that I have a damn near perfect memory. A year after the family member moved next door, I was diagnosed with high-functioning autism, Asperger's, whatever it's called now. All that matters is I hear the grays display certain traits reminiscent of autism. Strict adherence to routine, severe reactions if that routine is disturbed, almost mechanical behavior in some cases, and that they take interest in those with autism. Some have speculated that there's a link. 2 years after the diagnosis, I talked with the shrink who diagnosed me and stopped taking Zoloft due to the side effects. I mean, look, if you're a 15-year-old male with no sex drive, not even pushing 5 feet 5 inches, no acne, no facial hair, can't even jerk off, something's wrong. About 6 months after stopping the Zoloft, I remember GTA 5 came out around this time on the Xbox 360 and PS3, and I saw a really, really bright light in my room. Like so bright it came through the walls, and yes, I know what a car light looks like. They don't look like that. Ever. Ever since then, I have been experiencing a gradual cognitive decline that almost feels like dementia, and I believe my brother is experiencing the same thing, only he hasn't spoken up about it. I tried getting help, but no one really believes there's anything wrong. More recently, I get this feeling of being dragged out from under my blanket by my shins at night. Not every night, but enough that I notice, enough that I dread falling asleep sometimes. It's not like a full-body pull, just a subtle, insistent tug, like something is testing my weight, seeing if it can move me. I wake up, and my blankets are always shifted slightly. But it's never enough to prove anything, just enough to feel wrong. As for drug usage, I started consuming cannabis recreationally on a fairly regular basis when I was 17, a year after the cognitive decline began. So that didn't cause it. And I know my younger brother has never done drugs. I had my first few shots of alcohol at 13, but nothing that would have permanently messed with my brain. I've probably screwed my life over, and I know people will ask if I have done drugs, but the truth is, I don't think any of this is caused by that. I think it's something else. And that's not even everything. Sometimes I get this feeling, this deep, gut-wrenching certainty that I've been somewhere else, that I just don't remember it. It's this sensation that lingers on the edges of my mind, like a dream I can't fully grasp but know was real. It comes in flashes, sounds I don't recognize but feel familiar. The sensation of pressure against my skull, like something was inside my head, digging through my thoughts. And the worst part, the thing that haunts me the most, every now and then I see them. Not fully, never fully, just a glimpse, a shape in the corner of my vision, a silhouette that vanishes the moment I turn my head. But I know what they are, even if I never get a clear look, even if I never remember them completely. The first time I truly felt like I wasn't alone, I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep. that strange, in-between state where your body is heavy and your mind is floating. And then I felt it, the hum, low, steady, vibrating in my bones. It wasn't coming from outside, it wasn't coming from the house, it was inside me. I opened my eyes and the light was already there, brighter than the sun, but cold, like staring into something that wasn't meant to exist in this world. My body refused to move. I tried to sit up, tried to scream, but I was locked in. And then, nothing. Just a snap, a shift. And I was waking up like nothing had happened, like I had skipped time. I don't talk about this with people I know, not anymore. The few times I've brought it up, I've been laughed at, dismissed. Oh, you just sleepwalk. Oh, it's just sleep paralysis. You just have a vivid imagination. But I don't feel like this is imagination. I don't feel like this is normal, because it's not just me. My brother avoids talking about it, but I see it in his eyes. That same emptiness, that same gnawing feeling of something missing. And I wonder if we're both feeling it, if we're both changing, then what did they do to us? Some nights, when I lie in bed, I stare at the ceiling and force myself to stay awake as long as I can. I tell myself it won't happen if I don't sleep, but that's a lie, because sometimes when I'm just lying there, fully awake, fully aware, I feel it again, that pull, that silent shift in the air, and I know they're there, waiting, watching. And the truth is, I don't think they ever really left.